Widowed cowboy saves a girl beaten by her stepfather. What happened afterward shocked all. Daniel Mercer had not always lived in silence. Years ago, laughter used to drift across his wide ranch fields, carried by warm Texas winds and the gentle voice of his wife, Sarah. But after illness took her away 3 years earlier, the world seemed to grow quieter around him. The old wooden house outside Amarillo still stood strong against the endless plains, yet it felt far too large for one man and his memories. Each morning, Daniel rose before sunrise. The habit had stayed with him even though there was no one left to share breakfast with. Brewed strong coffee, stood on the porch and watched the sky shift from deep blue to dusty gold. The land stretched endlessly before him, fences running across dry grass, cattle moving slowly in the distance, and the long dirt road that connected him to the outside world. Work filled his days. He repaired broken fence posts, checked water troughs, and guided cattle across pasture land. His hands were rough from years of labor, and his sun-lined face showed the marks of wind, dust, and long days outdoors. He spoke little, even to the animals. The rhythm of ranch life was steady and predictable, and that predictability helped him avoid thinking too much about what he had lost. People in town respected Daniel. They knew him as honest and dependable. At the feed store, he nodded politely, paid for supplies, and left without lingering. Invitations to community dinners or church events were always met with a quiet thank you and a gentle refusal. It wasn't that he disliked people. He simply felt more comfortable with open land and wide skies than crowded rooms filled with conversation he didn't know how to join anymore. Despite his solitude, traces of Sarah remained everywhere. Her favorite rocking chair sat near the window. A faded quilt she had sewn still covered the spare bed. Her flower pots, though long dried, rested along the porch railing. Daniel never moved them. Keeping them in place felt like holding on to something steady in a world that had shifted without warning. Winter that year arrived with sharp winds and early darkness. Evenings came quickly, and the ranch grew still after sunset. One such evening, Daniel drove into town for supplies: feed grain, a coil of wire, and motor oil. The sky had already begun to dim by the time he finished loading the truck. The cashier wished him a safe drive home, and he responded with his usual quiet nod before pulling onto the long road leading back to the ranch. The headlights cut through the growing darkness. Dust rose behind the truck and vanished into the cold air. Daniel's mind wandered, as it often did during the drive home. He thought about repairing the south fence before the next storm. He thought about whether he should finally replace the aging barn roof. Mostly he tried not to think about the empty house waiting at the end of the road. About 10 miles outside town, something caught his eye. At first he thought it was debris blown by wind, a bundle of cloth or a stray sack near the roadside ditch. But as the truck moved closer, he saw movement. Instinctively, he slowed down. A figure crouched low beside the ditch, partially hidden by tall weeds. Daniel stopped the truck and left the engine running. For a moment, he simply watched through the windshield, unsure whether he was seeing clearly in the dim light. Then the figure moved again. He stepped out slowly, careful not to startle whoever was there. The cold air stung his face as gravel crunched beneath his boots. He kept his voice calm and low. "Hey there," he said gently. "You all right?" It was a teenage girl. She looked thin and frightened, her clothes dusty and torn at the edges. Strands of hair clung to her face, and her arms were wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to stay invisible. When she saw him, her eyes widened with alarm, and she shifted backward as though preparing to run. Daniel stopped several feet away, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "Just saw you by the road and wanted to make sure you're safe." She didn't answer. The wind whispered through the dry grass. A distant vehicle passed far down the highway, its sound fading quickly into the night. The girl's breathing was quick and uneven, and she kept glancing toward the road as if expecting someone to appear. Daniel noticed the faint marks on her face and the way she winced when shifting her weight. Years of working with injured animals had taught him to recognize fear and pain even when no words were spoken. "You cold?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. He removed his heavy jacket and placed it gently on the ground between them before stepping back. "You can take it," he said. "No rush." For several seconds she did not move. Then slowly she reached forward and picked it up, wrapping it around herself. The coat nearly swallowed her thin frame. Another set of headlights appeared in the distance. The girl's reaction was immediate. Panic flashed across her face. She crouched lower and grabbed Daniel's sleeve. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't leave me here." The fear in her voice carried more weight than any explanation could. Daniel did not ask questions. He simply nodded. "All right," he said softly. "You can ride with me. We'll figure things out. She hesitated only a moment before climbing into the passenger seat. She kept her eyes down and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Daniel closed the door gently, walked around to the driver's side, and pulled back onto the road. They drove in silence. The heater hummed softly, filling the cab with warmth. The girl stared at the floorboard as if afraid to look outside. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, giving her space. He knew trust could not be forced. After several miles, he spoke. "My name's Daniel," he said. "You don't have to talk if you're not ready." She swallowed and nodded slightly. The ranch gate appeared ahead, illuminated by the truck's headlights. Daniel slowed, stepped out to open it, and drove through before closing it behind them. The house lights glowed faintly against the darkness, a small island of warmth in the vast open land. When the truck stopped, the girl looked toward the house with uncertainty. "It's safe," Daniel said. "You can stay the night. Get some rest." She did not respond, but she did not refuse. Inside, the house smelled faintly of wood and coffee. Daniel guided her to the kitchen table and placed a glass of water in front of her. "Oh." He warmed leftover stew on the stove, setting a bowl before her without asking questions. She stared at the food for a long moment before lifting the spoon. Hunger overcame hesitation. She ate slowly at first, then with growing urgency. Daniel pretended not to notice. He busied himself rinsing dishes and adjusting the thermostat. When she finished, he showed her the spare bedroom. The quilt on the bed, sewn years ago by Sarah, added a quiet softness to the room. "You can sleep here," he said. "Bathroom's down the hall. If you need anything, I'll be in the next room." She lingered in the doorway, uncertain. "Thank you," she whispered. It was the first time she had spoken more than a few words. Daniel nodded and closed the door softly behind her. Later that night, he sat alone at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. The house no longer felt empty, yet he sensed that the silence now held a different weight, one filled with questions and unknowns. Outside, the wind moved across the plains. Inside, a frightened girl slept under a quilt stitched with kindness years before. Daniel did not know what tomorrow would bring. He only knew that leaving her by the roadside had never truly been an option. And for the first time in a long while, the quiet house felt like it was waiting for something new to begin. Morning arrived slowly over the wide plains, bringing a pale gold light that spread across the frost-tipped grass and weathered fence posts. Daniel Mercer had been awake for hours, as usual. Habit pulled him from sleep before dawn, but this morning felt different. There was another presence in the house, quiet, uncertain, and fragile, and he found himself moving more softly than he had in years. He brewed coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching the cattle drift lazily through the pasture. The sky was clear, and the cold air carried a stillness that seemed to hold the world in place. For a long moment, he wondered whether the girl in the spare bedroom had slept at all. He heard a faint sound behind him. She stood near the hallway entrance, wrapped in the oversized jacket he had given her. Her hair was still tangled from sleep, and her posture remained cautious as if she expected to be told to leave at any moment. "Morning," Daniel said gently. She hesitated before replying. "Morning." Her voice was soft and unsure, but clearer than the night before. "There's coffee," he said, then paused. "And milk, if you'd rather." She nodded and sat at the table, cradling the warm mug in both hands. The heat seemed to comfort her. Daniel placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of her without ceremony. She watched him for a moment, as if unsure whether accepting kindness carried a cost. Then she began to eat. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt careful, like two strangers learning how to share space without stepping on hidden wounds. After a while, Daniel spoke. "You got a name?" She lowered her eyes to the table. Seconds passed. "Lily," she said finally. It might not have been her real name, he sensed, but he did not press further. "Well, Lily," he replied, "you can stay here until you figure out what you want to do next." Her hands tightened around the mug. "You won't send me back?" she asked quickly. Daniel shook his head. "No one's sending you anywhere." Relief flickered across her face, though fear did not fully leave her eyes. The day unfolded with quiet routines. Daniel stepped outside to tend to chores, unsure whether she would remain inside or disappear down the long dirt road. When he returned from checking the north fence line, he found her standing near the porch steps, watching the cattle from a distance. "They won't bother you," he said. She nodded but stayed where she was. Later, he handed her a pair of worn work gloves. "If you want to help, you can. If not, that's all right too." At first she moved cautiously, as though unfamiliar with simple tasks, but as the hours passed, she carried small buckets, gathered scattered tools, and helped refill a water trough. She worked quietly, never straying far from the house. Every sudden noise made her tense. When a gate slammed in the wind, she flinched. When a truck rumbled faintly on a distant road, she froze and scanned the horizon. Daniel noticed but said nothing. By afternoon, clouds drifted across the winter sky, dimming the sunlight. They sat on the porch steps with bowls of stew warm from the previous night. Lily ate slowly this time, less driven by hunger and more by cautious comfort. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Have for a while," Daniel answered. She nodded, as if she understood more than he had said. The quiet rhythm of ranch life might have continued unnoticed if not for the watchful eyes of a small rural community. The nearest neighbor lived nearly a mile away, but in open country nothing remained unseen for long. By the second day, a pickup slowed along the road. By the third, someone drove past more slowly than necessary. Daniel had never cared much about local curiosity, but now he felt its weight. A widowed rancher living alone was one thing. A widowed rancher suddenly sharing his property with a silent teenage girl was another. On the fourth morning, Lily stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes when a truck passed the gate. She stiffened, gripping the edge of the counter. "Who was that?" she asked. "Neighbor, probably checking fences." She watched the road long after the truck disappeared. That afternoon, Daniel suggested something carefully. "There are people in town who help when someone's in trouble." Her reaction was immediate. She shook her head, stepping backward. "No," she said, her voice tight with panic. "Please don't tell anyone." "I wouldn't do anything without telling you first," he said calmly. Her breathing slowed, but the fear remained visible. He understood then that whatever she had fled was not something she believed could be fixed quickly or easily. That night, the wind rose, rattling the window panes and humming through gaps in the barn siding. Lily sat curled at one end of the couch, wrapped in a blanket Daniel had found in the hallway closet. The television flickered quietly, though neither of them paid attention to it. "Storm coming?" she asked. "Just wind," he replied. She nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the windows. Later, as Daniel turned off the lights and prepared for bed, he heard a soft sound from the hallway. Lily stood there, uncertain. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm not used to quiet places." "You're safe here," he answered. She studied his face, as if weighing whether to believe him. "Thank you," she whispered again. Over the next few days, small routines formed between them. Lily began waking earlier, sometimes already dressed and seated at the table before Daniel finished brewing coffee. She helped feed the chickens, sweep the porch, and organize tools in the barn. Though she spoke little, she listened carefully, learning tasks with quiet focus. Daniel noticed the change in the house. The air no longer felt heavy with stillness. Footsteps echoed in the hallway again. A second mug rested beside the coffee pot each morning. Even the old clock on the wall seemed louder now, marking time in a home that felt alive. Yet fear still lingered in the corners of Lily's movements. She avoided the road-facing windows. She startled at unfamiliar sounds. At night, she locked her bedroom door. On the sixth evening, while they worked in the barn, the distant growl of an engine drifted across the plains. Lily froze, her grip tightening around the feed scoop. The sound faded, but her hands continued to tremble. Daniel set the tool down gently. No one's coming here unless they're invited. As darkness settled, the ranch lights cast warm circles across the yard. The world beyond them disappeared into shadow. Inside the house, warmth and quiet offered a fragile sense of safety. Daniel sat at the table that night, noticing how Lily's presence had shifted something inside him. He still carried grief, and he always would. But the silence that once pressed in from every wall had loosened its grip. Down the hallway, he heard her door close softly. Outside, the wind moved across the open land, carrying dust and cold air across miles of empty plains. Inside, the ranch held a cautious peace, not free from fear, but steadier than before. Neither of them knew how long this fragile arrangement would last. The past still lingered beyond the gate, and the future remained uncertain. But for now, the ranch had become a place where silence no longer meant loneliness, and where trust, though fragile, had begun to take root. The nights on the ranch were usually quiet, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the wind sliding across the open plains. But several nights after Lily arrived, the silence shattered. Daniel woke to a sharp cry from down the hallway. At first he thought it was the wind forcing itself through the cracks in the siding. Then he heard it again, a frightened scream, followed by hurried breathing and the sound of something falling. He was out of bed in seconds. When he reached the hallway, Lily's door was partly open. A faint light from the bedside lamp spilled onto the floor. He knocked gently on the doorframe. "Lily, you all right?" No answer came, only ragged breathing. He pushed the door open slowly. She was sitting upright against the headboard, eyes wide and unfocused. The blanket tangled around her legs. The quilt lay crumpled on the floor. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her temples, as if trying to block out a memory that would not stop replaying. You're safe, Daniel said quietly, keeping his voice calm. It was a dream. Her breathing came in short bursts. She looked around the room, disoriented, as if unsure where she was. It's the ranch, he continued. You're here. Nothing's going to hurt you. It took several long moments before her breathing slowed. She pulled her knees close to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, rocking slightly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to wake you. You don't have to apologize, he said. He picked up the fallen quilt and placed it gently over her shoulders. He didn't ask questions. He simply sat in the wooden chair near the door, giving her space while making sure she wasn't alone. After a while, the room grew quiet again, but the fear hadn't fully left her face. She stared at the floor, gathering the courage to speak. I thought he found me, she said, barely audible. Daniel didn't need to ask who she meant. The words seemed to open a door she had kept locked for years. Her voice shook at first, then steadied, as if she had been carrying this story too long to keep it inside any longer. She spoke of a house that never felt like home. She spoke of shouting that echoed through thin walls and nights filled with dread instead of rest. She described how small mistakes brought harsh anger, how fear became part of daily life, and how silence felt safer than speaking up. Daniel listened without interrupting. She told him about her mother, who lived in constant worry and seemed powerless to change anything. Lily had learned early to stay quiet, to stay out of sight, and to endure each day without drawing attention. Years passed like that, she said, each one harder than the last. Recently, the tension in the house had grown worse. One evening, after another outburst, she realized she could not remain there any longer. She waited until the house was quiet, gathered what little she could carry, and slipped out into the night. She had nowhere to go. She walked along dark roads, avoiding passing vehicles, hiding whenever headlights appeared. Hunger and exhaustion slowed her steps, but fear kept her moving. When Daniel's truck approached, she had already begun to lose hope. I thought if I stayed still, she said, no one would see me. Daniel sat quietly, letting her words settle into the room. The weight of her experiences filled the silence between them. You did the right thing, he said finally. You got yourself out. She looked at him, uncertainty still clouding her expression. What if he comes looking? The question lingered in the air. Daniel chose his words carefully. If anyone comes here trying to harm you, they won't get far. She studied his face, searching for doubt. She found none. Still, the fear remained. The next morning, the sky was pale and overcast. Lily moved slowly through breakfast, her eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. Daniel pretended not to notice her fatigue. He spoke about ordinary things, the weather, fence repairs, the need to check the south pasture, giving the day a sense of normal rhythm. Routine he knew could be grounding. Later that afternoon, while repairing a loose hinge on the barn door, Daniel spotted dust rising along the distant road. A pickup truck appeared briefly between the fence posts before disappearing behind a curve. Vehicles passed occasionally, but something about this one made him pause. It slowed near the property line before continuing on. He told himself it meant nothing. Still, he watched the road longer than usual. Inside the house, Lily folded laundry at the kitchen table. The repetitive motion seemed to calm her. She had begun to take small ownership of daily tasks, arranging dishes neatly and sweeping the floors without being asked, yet she continued avoiding the windows facing the road. That evening, Daniel made a phone call from the porch, keeping his voice low. He contacted a pastor in Amarillo whom he trusted, a man known for helping families in difficult situations. Daniel did not share Lily's name or location, only described a young girl needing protection and guidance. The pastor listened carefully. She needs to be safe first, the man said. Then we can figure out the right steps. You're not alone in this. Daniel ended the call feeling both reassured and uneasy. He had spent most of his life solving problems with his hands, fixing fences, mending equipment, caring for animals. This situation required a different kind of strength. Inside, Lily sat on the couch reading an old magazine she had found in a drawer. When he entered, she looked up quickly as if bracing for bad news. Everything okay? She asked. Yes, he replied. Just checking in with someone I trust. She nodded, though worry lingered in her eyes. Over the next 2 days, the sense of watchfulness grew. Once, while Lily helped gather eggs from the chicken coop, the faint sound of an engine drifted across the plains. She froze, her hand tightening around the basket. The sound faded, but the fear remained. That night, she locked her bedroom door again. Daniel sat at the kitchen table long after the lights were turned off, staring into the darkness beyond the window. The open land usually brought him peace. Now it felt like an expanse where anything could appear without warning. The ranch had become more than a place to live. It had become a refuge, and he intended to keep it that way. Just before midnight, a pair of headlights appeared briefly on the distant road, then vanished behind the hill. Daniel remained seated, listening to the quiet house around him. The ticking clock, the faint hum of the heater, the steady stillness of a place holding its breath. Down the hallway, Lily slept, without crying out. But beyond the gate, uncertainty lingered in the dark, waiting for morning.